Well, that is one type of antisocial behaviour. Let's widen the conversation now with my guests this morning. Thank you for joining us. George Hollingbery is the Conservative MP for the Meon Valley. John Apter is chairman of the Hampshire Police Federation, speaking up as always for police officers. And Marilyn Heebron was involved in setting up volunteer street patrols on the estate where she lives in Four Marks. Marilyn, let's talk to you first about that. Why? Why did you do it?
Well, Hollingbery, Four Marks is a population of about 5,000, so it's getting beyond the sort of village confines town, growing rapidly. Beautiful place to live. I've lived there for 28 years, with minor problems from time to time. About 3 years ago, the problems, antisocial behaviour, absolutely escalated within my small estate where I lived. Other people in Four Marks knew very little about it. It would start at 5 o'clock in the evening. It will go on to 3 or 4 in the morning. Not always the same groups. There were different groups coming in at different times.
And what kinds of things were going on? What was the problem?
Youngsters as young as 13 drinking alcohol on the street corner at 5 o'clock. 6 o'clock, girls of about 15, 16 coming to drink alcohol on the green. Pregnancy testing kits left on the green. Youngsters on the very noisy bikes coming in at about 9 o'clock. More partying going on, and then later the older ones actually having a sort of a party and a meeting in the street. Drugs, alcohol.
So clear problems, and then what do? You form Street Watch?
Not at that time. At that time, felt very isolated. You're not aware. The youngsters aren't actually doing criminal damage, but they're having a severe effect on your quality of life. How do you approach it? Are your others feeling like you are? We're not encouraged to go out and engage with these youngsters, or haven't been for the past 10 years. What approach do you use? Should you call the police? You don't necessarily want to involve them if there's no criminal damage as such. It is just severe nuisance. So I gathered a group of neighbours together and we discussed. We didn't necessarily want to get the youngsters into trouble. We wanted to have effective use of the police, which meant giving them good intelligence if there was to be any action. And we wanted to reclaim our open spaces. Just sitting on the green. So
the community getting involved in doing that work. John Apter from the Police Federation, is this something that police officers support, the idea of the community getting out there and taking control themselves?
It's being a good citizen, and surely that's common sense, and that's what any police officer I represent would support. I think we have to appreciate, though, there's a line that shouldn't be crossed, and whilst I support any member of the public to engage with their local youths and so on, if there's antisocial crime taking place, or if there's a potential risk, then you really have to weigh up those risks and consider, is it the appropriate thing to go into that situation without contacting the police or other agencies, because there's a bigger picture here. It's about a social responsibility, about other agencies getting involved and helping you with the problem.
Antisocial behaviour, a big issue for the police. 45% of all calls are antisocial behaviour related.
Absolutely. But we look at antisocial behaviour, and I think there's a wide spectrum which is given the label now of antisocial behaviour. There's an awful lot of so-called antisocial behaviour where there's no crime committed. It's youths just stood on the street corner. Now, fortunately, we're not in a police state. We just can't lock everybody up for standing on the street corner. It's about engagement, working with the community, working with other agencies. And I have to say, in previous years, we've had the partnership tag attached to us with other agencies, such as the health service, education, and so on. But they're far too keen to allow us to take the lead role, and they take a step back. There needs to be a greater awareness of how we can all tackle antisocial behaviour.
George Hollingbery, this is David Cameron's Big Society in Action here in Four Marks. The community taking charge, doing something about it, acting, something you support.
I just hugely applaud it. The Big Society's had some critics as an idea, but this is absolutely it in action. Marilyn's group is doing exactly what I want to see people doing. There's no way that her group should stand in and try and replace the police. But there's also no reason why communities shouldn't come together to help themselves and make the police's job that much easier. And she's demonstrated admirably that local communities can make a real difference to where they live and really improve their quality of life if they just get engaged. And it's not a new model, don't forget. Neighbourhood Watch is exactly this model going forwards, and there's no reason why it shouldn't spread into all sorts of different areas of life.
Reasonably recently elected yourself, of course. What is your constituency like? Are you having antisocial behaviour problems there?
Yes, I've got a very rural side to my constituency where we have something that police has organised and probably has to be organised by the police called Country Watch, where local farmers get emails and texts and so on about what's going on in local areas, lead being removed, hay being stolen and so on and so forth. And I'm doing quite a bit of work on countryside theft at the moment because it is definitely increasing. And then I have the more suburban, more city-like areas of Waterlooville, Cowplain and Hart Plain, where exactly this model can be very, very effective. It's a combination of using local police resources, resources in schools, resources from parents, all coming together to make a difference. And I do have a couple of cases right now that demonstrate just how worrying this can be for some people.
Marilyn, back to you. Presumably you would rather the police be doing this rather than taking the responsibility on yourselves as a community.
No, I regard it as any citizen, any member of a community, that we have a certain duty to maintain and nurture that community. We can't expect the police to be on the street corner every hour of the day, which is what some people seem to want, in a quick response. And I'm only too glad that Chief Inspector Kedge had the idea of this street watch, which just melded and fitted in with what we felt was needed. So we became the first volunteers for the organisation.
Some communities, though, John, might think this is effectively policing on the cheap. You know, that must be a worry for you and your officers.
It certainly is a worry, and I think whilst the big society has got its values, what I would not want to see is for community groups such as this to be taken advantage of by government. There is a role to play for community. There's a greater role to play for all of society, parenting, and we can go across the whole spectrum of how this antisocial behaviour has such a negative impact. There's a role for policing, a very vital role, and antisocial behaviour, certainly across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, is a priority. But unfortunately, that priority is alongside many other priorities in policing. So we have to look at what we need to target our resources at, and potentially soon to be more limited resources.
But doesn't that tells you everything? The police are split a million different ways. We expect them to do enormous numbers of things, to have specialist paedophilia units, to have computer abuse units, all sorts of things hidden behind the scenes which we don't see out on the streets. So it behoves us as citizens to do as much as we can to help them. Now, no one suggests for a moment we should ask citizens to replace the police. That would be ludicrous. But we can all step up to the plate and do more for our communities than we currently do.
And of course your Home Secretary is saying we're going to ditch ASBOs anyway somewhere down the line. They're not working very
Well, I'm not sure she said exactly we're going to ditch ASBOs. She said that we will be seriously reviewing their effectiveness and whether or not there's a case for replacing them. My view is that there are certain areas and certain cases where they are entirely appropriate. Noise from next door neighbours, very antisocial behaviour between neighbouring properties can be very, very effectively dealt with, I suppose. But I think it's such an exciting area. I get so many complaints from people when I run street surgery saying, why isn't the council doing X? Yeah. And my response always is, well, why aren't you doing more of it?
In a word to each of you, is a nudge the better approach, or do we need the carrot and stick, Marilyn?
What I want to say is that when you actually get out there, engage with the youngsters, 99% of them fantastic, and let's get to know them, see what their problems are.
John, nudge, carrot and stick.
I think a little bit of everything, Alan, but more importantly, the police service should no longer be seen as the dumping ground for the public sector. It's got to be a universal approach by all.
We have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, that is it for this week. We will be back to our usual time of midday next week. And don't forget, you can see regular reports from Peter Henley at the Labour Party conference on BBC South Today. That's later on this week. For now, though, it's back to John and the team up there in Manchester. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.